Welcome to the Thought Brothers. I'm Gary Johnson, aka Mr. Producer. We have as our guest again, as a follow-up, Dr. Fredrick Clark, who's going to talk about diabetes and the complications. And Dr. Clark, I'm not going to put any words in your mouth. We're going to turn it right over to you right now. Dr. Fredrick Douglas Clark. Go right ahead.
Good evening.
How
I
you doing,
wanted to follow up with the last broadcast that we did on diabetes, and we didn't have enough time to delve into it, so I thought it might be a good idea to come with chapter 2, and that's what are the results of long-term diabetes, what we call diabetic complications. What are we trying to avoid? And the reason I thought that this was pertinent information is because it's one thing to get a diagnosis of diabetes. It is a totally different um, scenario when you're living with the condition for a number of years and you begin to see some of the deterioration that can occur in relation to being diabetic, long-term diabetes, unmanaged, poorly managed diabetes, poorly managed blood sugar. So I want to proceed first of all, and let's connect the dots to what we discussed last time about after you get the diagnosis, then what happens. So there is a term which is used to describe the findings when a patient sees a doctor and gets the diagnosis. That is called metabolic syndrome. They used to call it syndrome X. They used to say when they saw a presentation, a patient with diabetes, three things would present. They would be high blood sugar, high blood pressure, and high blood cholesterol or triglycerides. All these findings, when they draw blood and they make these determinations, when they do a physical on you and they check your vitals and whatnot, when they find this triad, they immediately began a course of treatment which is designed to lower the blood sugar, to lower the blood pressure, and to lower the blood cholesterol and triglycerides. And the purpose of that is they know that if these things are not lowered, they are what lead to the complications of diabetes. So typically, if you have high blood sugar readings, you're going to get first place on metformin. There are a number of other medications that they use. They call oral hypoglycemics, which are, oral medications, pills and whatnot. They may resort to, if that's not managing it well, they may resort to nutritional guidelines that you're going to follow, change your diet to reduce sugar intake or starch intake. And there's also a suggestion that you need to exercise to help to bring blood sugars down. The institution of insulin is typically if they find that the oral medications are not working, they find that, it's a situation where the blood sugars cannot be controlled through medication and diet and exercise, that they know that if we don't go to insulin, a lot of times the person simply is going to get worse. The high blood pressure, they usually put you on blood pressure medication, help to bring your blood pressure in line. So when you come back to the doctor, they're going to be checking to see whether or not these parameters that they want to meet are being met. The tricky one is the triglyceride cholesterol, because a lot of times patients don't quite understand triglycerides. I remember when I first got a diagnosis of diabetes and the doctor said you have high triglycerides. And though I had been in dental school and I heard the term triglycerides, I really didn't even know what that meant. And then very quickly, I'll let you know. Triglycerides are blood fats. When sugar or glucose is introduced into the body, which is not burned, will be converted by the liver into fat, and that fat flows in the bloodstream. It also is deposited in fat stores and fat cells, so you begin to see you gain weight, particularly around the midsection mostly, generally throughout the body over time. But the other thing is that not only do you get the fat in the bloodstream, but you also get the fat in the liver. And the fat in the bloodstream has a lot of deleterious effects. I'll go into that a little bit later. Now, high blood sugars. usually a result of low insulin levels. So either your pancreas is not putting out enough insulin, or you have the inability to remove the sugar from the bloodstream. So what happens is the person, when they first get the diagnosis, what they find is that the blood sugar is going to be very high, and the doctor may, initially, a lot of people end up in the hospital because the blood sugar is so high. I'm quite sure a lot of you've heard patients goes to the hospital and they said, "Oh, the patient's blood sugar was 800." Well, normal resting blood sugar is between 80 and 100. So when you're in that range of 80 to 100, then typically if they do what they call the A1C, which is a 3 month test to see how well your blood sugar is controlled, they will find that in your normal range, you'll be between 5.6, 5.7. And after you get to above 6, they begin to give you a diagnosis of diabetes. But if your blood sugars are in that range, you're relatively healthy, you're non-diabetic. If your blood sugars are ranging 200, 300, 400, 500, then you're diabetic. And when you get to the level of 800, a lot of times you're going to start to feel symptoms that you're going to end up in a hospital. Some people pass out. Some people even become comatose. And they would put you in the hospital and give you IV insulin to bring it down. So it usually takes a couple of days to bring that blood sugar down. What happens if you have um, what causes this? A lot of times it's caused by, first of all, the insulin is produced by an organ called the pancreas. And as long as the body is producing a sufficient amount of insulin to control your blood sugars, you're non-diabetic. You may still, because insulin is what we call a fat storage hormone, you may still gain weight, but you may not become diabetic. But literally, you can't have both to occur. You can become diabetic, and you can have obesity. And I spoke the last time about a proclivity or propensity towards becoming diabetic from a genetic standpoint. It's not genetic, but if you're in a family that diabetes occurs, if you're not eating properly, you're eating the wrong foods, you're eating, lots of starches and sugars, then you may have the possibility of becoming diabetic. It's not guaranteed, but it's a very high possibility. Organs that play a role in diabetes development. The two most important are the pancreas and the liver. The pancreas plays the role of producing the insulin. The liver plays a role in that it controls blood sugars. It will take blood sugar and convert it to fat, or it may take blood sugars and form what we call glycogen, which is a stored form of glucose or sugar in the bloodstream, or it may convert it to triglycerides, well, fats that are either deposited in fat stores or those will be in the bloodstream. So if you're diabetic, those triglyceride levels, because they're not going into fat stores and you're not burning the sugar, they're going to be present in the bloodstream at a high level. So you will have high triglyceride or high fat levels in the blood. And so when you hear them talking about HDL and LDL, they're talking about fat, they're talking about cholesterol particles. They're talking about uh, the cholesterol, if it's elevated, and the triglycerides are elevated, both of these things can contribute to arterial disease. What they do is that they cause plaque formation within the arterial wall. So you hear a term called atherosclerosis. That's when you start to get destruction of the artery walls. So sugar in and of itself is what we call an inflammatory molecule to the body. Though the body does need glucose, excessive amount of glucose causes an immune system response that's called inflammation within the artery walls, and it destroys the artery walls, and that's how we end up getting plaque formation and atherosclerosis. Um, so now, when you begin to understand that it does affect your circulation, then you begin to understand why you have complications. And the reason that you have complications is because as those arterial walls are affected, um, those vessels that are small vessels that run to certain parts of the body typically are where you're going to see the complication of diabetes to first occur. So we talk about what are some of the most common areas where you see diabetic complications begin to occur. Well, I'll bring up the kidney because poor blood flow to the kidneys causes kidney failure. The eyes, poor blood flow to the eyes causes diabetic retinopathy, can lead to blindness. To the extremities, poor blood flow to the lower extremities, to the legs and feet, can cause you to lose toes or lose legs due to poor blood flow and gangrene, infection, whatnot. So some of the vascular conditions. So vascular refers to blood, to the arteries, to the blood supply, to the circulation. So arterial disease, I mentioned, is called atherosclerosis. Nerve disease is known as neuropathy. So a person who's diabetic sometimes will complain that they will feel pins and needles, especially in the lower extremity. They'll feel like they get tingling and pain and whatnot in the lower extremity. So they call that diabetic neuropathy, and that's caused by poor blood flow to the lower extremities. And you also get nerve damage associated with lack of blood flow. Kidney disease is called nephropathy. So I mentioned that you will get poor blood flow to the kidneys, so the kidneys will begin to fail. You will first see that a person is going to have poor kidney function over time. And as that occurs, they call it chronic kidney disease. But if the kidneys fail completely, that's called complete, what they call renal failure. And that's what leads to the person having to go on dialysis. Eye disease is called diabetic retinopathy. Now, diabetic retinopathy is not something that you hear a lot about, but it is a critical component of diabetes complications in that the retina is at the back of the eye. The retina controls the ability to see. The retina is a nerve connected directly to the brain. And so the retina at the back of the eye is at the back of the eye wall. It literally will fall down, detach. So we remember, those of us who are a little bit older, boxer Sugar Ray Leonard, because he was hit in the eye, he got a detached retina. So they literally have to go in and surgically repair the retina, otherwise you will go blind. So diabetes, a lot of times, because people are unaware that retinopathy is occurring, they may, have some very mild symptoms. They may have, they call floaters in the eyes. But a lot of times what they get is in the back of the eye, they'll get bleeding in the back of the eye. And that blood in itself will blur the vision. You might see even redness in the back of in the vision, the field of vision. So diabetic retinopathy is something that you don't hear a lot about, but something that we need to get the word out to people who, especially those who have diabetes, to get your eyes checked, to make certain that your ophthalmologist can do an eye examination and make sure that you don't, follow a path that ends up in blindness. Liver disease. Because the body is responsible for processing sugar or glucose, and it's also, responsible for filtering the blood to metabolize foodstuffs, chemicals, whatnot. It creates metabolites that the body eliminates. But because the liver does produce sugar, and I'll tell you the genesis of how this occurs. Let's talk about obesity. So the liver will take in the sugar, all the sugar that doesn't go into the muscle tissue, the other tissue, the brain or whatever, to be utilized, immediately is converted to fat. So the first place where you get fat formation is generally in the liver. The liver can hold about 1 pound of fat. After that, the liver will have, you're going to have the blood, you're going to have the blood filled with fat, triglycerides, but you're also going to see that there's going to get fat formation in the pancreas, and then you begin to see fat formation in the inside the stomach, and they call that the visceral area. Fat builds up all around the organs internally, and then it spills out into what we call the subcutaneous fat area. So that's when you look and you see the round belly and the big arms and the big face and everything. So that's called subcutaneous fat. Subcutaneous fat is not nearly as bad as visceral fat, because that fat around the organs is what squeezes the organs. That it squeezes the organs. It squeezes the artery. It causes what we call inflammatory cytokines. And cytokines are chemicals that they create inflammation throughout the body. So fat in and of itself, it can be dangerous, but the bigger problem is if it's not the external fat that you see, but it's the internal fat around the organs that cause a lot of the more serious problems. The other problem of complication you can have is what we call pancreatitis. You can have acute pancreatitis when you get pain and the pancreas is inflamed, or you can have chronic pancreatitis. Pancreatitis uh, is something that can lead to pancreatic cancer, and pancreatic cancer is in most individuals is almost a death sentence. Um, if you hear people get pancreatic cancer, a lot of them will die within a year's time. So, and it's not a lot of time inoperable. Um, the other areas, a couple of areas that are very important in terms of complications are the arteries of the heart. So we talk about if you know the anatomy of the heart has large vessels that go to the body, to the head and to the lower body. You call the aorta, and but you have the smaller arteries that supply the heart itself. So if you look at a picture of a heart, you'll see these arteries that's kind of laying over the surface of the heart. Those are called coronary arteries. So that's called coronary artery disease. Coronary artery disease means that you're getting blood clots and you're getting deterioration of the arteries around the heart. And when that occurs, if you get a blood clot in the coronary arteries, that's when you start getting heart attack symptoms. That's when you start getting angina. That's when you start getting poor blood flow to the heart. Uh, Coronary artery disease can result in a sudden heart attack. You can die from it suddenly, but if you're fortunate to get to a hospital and they can, well, before the primary mode of treatment was to do open heart surgery. But so when they learned how to create stenting or put stents in, and they've been able to treat heart disease successfully without having to do open heart surgery in most individuals. But
Hey Doc,
those, yes, sir.
let me pull you over to the side of the road for a minute.
Sure.
This is heavy.
Yes, it is.
I can we break in and just ask you one or two questions before we
Sure.
get too deep?
Yeah, I was almost done, but yeah, go right ahead. Ask your question.
Yeah, because I was
And keep
well.
up with the
Let me
notes, huh?
turn it over and see who has some other notes first.
Okay, sure.
Anybody? Because I was taking some notes.
Sure.
Well, Doc, I did some quick research and I found it to be kind of troubling. I did some research as far as Black females
Hmm.
that are overweight,
Yeah.
and it was like 57%.
Hmm.
And a large percentage of the females who are overweight are diabetic. And then I got uh, the males that are overweight are 67%, which is about 10% more. So then I went on and tried to research as far as Black females with diabetes, and I came up with 13.4, and the men are 13.8. So the troubling thing is, it seems like the diabetes problem is very closely related, male or female. A lot of times when you see these diseases and things are women are will have them more than men, or men vice versa. But with diabetes, it seems like it's a very, very close race between men and women. Have you noticed that in your research?
I think that first of all, if you understand that we're not talking about diabetes, we're talking about, and I want to get it outside of just saying diabetes. It's just that diabetes is easy to pinpoint because you see it so much. But it's really what we call metabolic disease. It's like metabolic means like how are we processing our food? So it's not sex specific. It's just that I would say that the habits of men and women are different. So men are much frequently a lot of time much more active in terms of how they work as opposed to women. So if you say who's more sedentary or who has a lifestyle that doesn't have them putting out a lot, expending a lot of energy. So women typically, have I'm not going to say softer, but not as hard a life in terms of their activities, their daily activities, and what they do in work. Men do construction work. They do a lot of things that are put in a lot of expend a lot of energy. But I think I don't think that you can just break it down and say, well, women have a greater propensity towards diabetes than men. I think it's more so a thing of just lifestyle. So.
Okay.
All right. Hey, Dr. Clark, I just want to jump in there and ask a couple questions. Based on, like Gary said, this is a lot. This is very deep. You know, there's a couple scenarios out there. I want to see if I can get your feedback on, okay? And these to me are what I've seen in my community and what I've seen in my home community, my work community, the community I grew up in. You have a scenario, two-part question, a two-part scenario. Part A of a scenario, you have, whether it be man or woman, okay, in a community that has an issue with getting access to quality, healthy food, okay? There are some communities inside the Beltway or in certain city areas where you cannot walk to a grocery store. You cannot, in some cases, catch a public transportation to a grocery store unless you transfer 2 or 3 times. And I guess they're called food deserts. So you have to basically know where you can go to get quality, healthy food. Going someplace to get snack food, no problem. You can get that on the corner. You can get your smoke, your drink, your ho-hos, your Hostess cupcakes, whatever, no problem. You can get that potato chips, no problem. But realistically, there are a lot of communities where people are subject, again, who may not have it'd be a hereditary situation, but they don't have access to quality, healthy foods. And their diet is basically the blame as to why they're heading towards diabetes if they haven't gotten it. Then on the flip side, you have people in maybe wealthier communities or have access to everything. They have a Whole Foods and they have all these different Harris Teeters and all these fancy markets with all these fancy produce and money and access and is not an issue, but yet it's hereditary. So my question really boils down to, what is a solid recommendation? I guess maybe there's no specific solution, but what's a good recommendation for someone who doesn't have access in their neighborhoods to quality, healthy food, and who's doesn't have a hereditary issue? But then what's the reverse when someone has access to healthy food, but yet it is a hereditary problem? So part A and point B are two different perspectives. Can you weigh in on that?
Sure. First of all, most people who live in a food desert don't know they're in a food desert. And the ease at which you can get something to satisfy your hunger is, to them, that's a good thing. So I can go to McDonald's and I can get a breakfast sandwich, just like that. That's a good thing. So you don't think in terms of food as being good or bad. You think of, I'm satisfying a need. And also people don't understand, because frequently the conversations that we're having are not being had in those communities. In other words, no one's saying to them that, the food you're eating is not good quality. The food you should be eating is over there on the other side that you can't get to. So the people who are eating this type of food, even if they had access to good quality food, they probably wouldn't buy it anyway. So the thing is, if you say someone who normally eats a certain type of diet and they're used to eating that diet and no one has educated them about it, if you go to the grocery store and they have, money or EBT card or whatever they're going to use, or WIC or whatever they're going to use, and you look in their grocery cart, they have access to food, but their choices are what they're used to eating. So you can't change that unless, of course, you have someone who's going to share with them the information to say, you know what you're eating, what's in your grocery cart is not good for you. And that's not being done in a large part in the communities where people have food deserts, or when people have, I've seen people with EBT cards and choose to go buy, they have parameters, say, well, you can't buy anything but foodstuffs. You can't buy, Pampers or cigarettes or stuff like that. But you'll see them, they'll go buy, crab legs, $100 crab legs, and that's really not going to feed, that's a one-day meal. Whereas they could take that same $100 and how much could they buy in broccoli and greens and carrots and, healthy foods. So it's a mindset. But now you mentioned, say, about someone who lives in a community where they have access to the good food, they have money, that's not a problem. It still comes down to education. It still comes down to also understanding how you must be intentional in understanding about what your diet is and intentionally choosing those things that are going to keep you healthy. See, we operate on autopilot when it comes to eating and food because we are conditioned from the time we're children to eat a certain kind of way. So unless someone alters your thought patterns and makes you understand that, you know what, how you're eating can lead to this, can lead to disease. And the reason that I'm talking about complications is because most times there's a division in understanding people who are young who don't have disease and those who are older who are passing into that process of having disease. The ones who really need to know are the ones who haven't gotten it yet, but the ones who do have it need to know how to best manage it. But if we don't talk about complications, then this person who's 25 won't know why grandma at 60 had her foot amputated.
Dr. Clark, thank you for shedding some light on those key topics and areas of concern that I had, and I will be passing that information on to people I know. Thank you.
Okay.
CJ, get in there. I see you want to jump in there.
Sure. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Can hear you quite well.
So I just kind of wanted to add to the comments, and I guess it's not less of a question than a comment, but when you're talking about the lifestyle changes and how people, even when given the choice for healthy food, will choose the alternative of junk food. A lot of people, and I think we touched upon this last time you're on here a little bit, but a lot of some of that goes down to, like you said, the regulations and what they're able to put in our food in terms of they have scientists coming in to chemically addict you to Doritos to make sure that you are addicted to the junk food, to make sure not only does it taste good, it has the optimum crispiness, it has the optimum, like they bring in scientists to make sure that the food is addictive, not just unhealthy. And that's where some of those chemicals and other things that our government, lobbied, mostly Republicans, the anti-regulation people, allow to happen. And they literally allow them to poison our food with things that other countries, specifically the UK is a great example, where you can have the same product from the same corporation and have vastly less chemicals and ingredients in the same products in the UK. So just maybe your thoughts on how that contributes to those bad choices and lifestyle choices that people end up making in these food deserts.
So think that the people who have access to poor food choices think about that, unfortunately. And most of them don't know that. There is I think they say that the average educational level of most people is an 8th grade education. That contributes to a lot of people not being able to really comprehend or have attention span to look at, food choices. In other words, see, I always say there are real foods and there are artificial foods. And people don't know the difference. So that it doesn't, a person picks up about a bag of potato chips. And yes, the corporations they're making sure that we're going to keep our profits. We're going to keep people addicted to this. We're going to make sure that the taste, hits the taste bud and it's just fantastically what we call hyper palatable. And that being the case, if you are a person who knows about good diet, good nutrition, and you're intentional about addressing that, then you won't eat those things anyway. But that's the problem. Most people who eat these type of foods are not aware of it, or they're so engaged in what they're doing that people have a thought pattern and say, well, you know what? I eat good most of the time. That's what they'll say. Not knowing that they don't know what eating good really is. Because if I tell you that you should be eating fruits and vegetables maybe 90% of the time, but every day, every week, you're eating potato chips and Cheetos and, pastries and donuts and all this sort of stuff. You do it unconsciously practically. So you have to be conscious. You got to become conscious of what you're eating, for you to change. And I'm going to be honest with you. I don't like the word lifestyle change. Because I think when a doctor says a patient lifestyle change, most people don't have a clue what that means. You have to delve in with the language, to use the language that people understand in order for them to get to a point of say, you know what? Now I understand what he said meant by changing my lifestyle. If you say you need a whole food diet, they need to know what whole food plant-based diet really means. So most people, I like the term raw vegan because you can't mistake that what that is. You know, so if you tell, okay, raw vegan, you're eating salad. You know. So the bottom line is that most of us, like I said, we're conditioned from the time we're little bitty kids. You give them a big bowl of cereal with milk and sugar, and they come up their whole life and they think that a big bowl of cereal, because it's like fortified with 10 vitamins and stuff, that is supposed to be healthy, but it's not. So the conditioning has to be changed. We have to really be aggressive in telling our people who've been conditioned to eat a certain kind of way. From the time they're little kids, when they get into their 20s or 30s, they're still eating the same thing they ate as little kids. They're not switching and saying, okay, well, let me change my diet to fruits and vegetables and, understand diseases that are being caused by me eating that way versus changing. So,
So I
Hey,
have
you know,
one more follow-up to that.
okay.
Do you think that corporate lobbying has anything to do with the lack of education and on this subject? Because I know when I was coming up in school and things like that, there was not a big emphasis on diet and things like that, and your lifestyle and things like that, even going up through college and all of that. So do you think that there is any correlation between that? Because the lobbyists spend a lot of money, the lobbyists have a lot of power to influence things like that in terms of what gets emphasized in certain budgets and things like that.
I compare the education that the government gives us about food to the same education they give us about financial literacy.
None.
Practically zero. Thank
Yeah.
you. No, even if you think about the food pyramid from years ago, they got to the point now where the food pyramid is they've really just, said forget about the food pyramid because they were giving you information on pyramid that contributed to disease. Now, I don't know who came up with it, but it make no sense at all to say that the vast majority of your meal should be carbohydrates. When we know that if you have three macronutrients that your body needs, proteins, fats, and carbs, that the only two of them are necessary, fats and proteins, because those are what your bodies are constructed of. Proteins make hormones, they make skin, they make keratin, they make hair, they make proteins, make everything. Fats contribute to, a lot of different cell wall of different cells of the body. Um, but carbohydrates don't contribute anything to the building of the body. But carbs are the largest part of the food that you eat, and that's why we're sick. I'm going to share something with you guys. I made a discovery about myself today, and I am what we call starch sensitive. Now, how did I find this out? And what's so disturbing about that is that I was eating starch, and I have what we call a continuous glucose monitor, so I can check my glucose on a regular basis. So I ate starch 2 days in a row, and my blood sugar did not go down below 200, even though I'm taking insulin all day long, 24 hours a day. It did not go down for 48 hours. And I realized that as I had a discussion with you guys about starch being converted to sugar, I found that the starch, in a lot of instances, is far worse for your body than sugar is. And had I known this 20 years ago, 30 years ago, that I probably could avoid a lot of the problems health-wise that I had because I didn't realize that all those sandwiches I was eating, all that pasta that I love to eat, all those artificial uh, foodstuffs. In other words, your body is not designed to take in refined flour. That's what's contributing probably the most to metabolic disease, to diabetes, of anything. But we are conditioned to eat a sandwich from the time we're a little bitty kid. You go to the cafeteria, you're gonna get a sandwich. You're gonna get pizza. You're gonna get flour. And you shouldn't have flour unless it's like whole grain flour, if you're gonna have it at all.
Dr. Clark, a lot of the problems that older people have, like you said, could have been avoided. But one thing with young people, they feel they're indestructible, and they don't think that one day they're going to get 50 or 60 years old like their parents, and that they're going to have these problems. And so consequently, whenever they meet their friends, they hook up at Wendy's, McDonald's, or either the food courts. And so they are eating Popeyes and these other things because they feel, well, when I get older, then I'll change my habits. And so a lot of times it's just, I guess, the feeling of being indestructible.
Mr. Spivey, I hate to disagree with you. I think they eat Popeye's chicken not because they think they can get away with it, but they just like the way it tastes. Number one. Number two, young
It
people
is
don't
good.
think. Yes.
I used to eat it.
Number two, young people don't think they're indestructible. Young people simply are on autopilot. They don't think. We think they think they're indestructible, but they don't think about that at all. Because they know good and well that if they're riding a motorcycle and they flip off of it, they hit that pavement, they might be gone. They might lose a limb. They know this. So they don't think they're indestructible. They're just unconscious.
It's true.
They're
Hey,
walking
Dr. Clark,
unconscious.
I got
Yes,
a
sir.
question. Hey, I want to ask you, if you're saying if someone were able to try to work towards that 90% of fruits and vegetables, okay, to clean up their diet, what is the 10% that you would recommend for the protein?
You can eat meat.
Okay.
Nobody
And
say
I
you
think,
can't eat meat.
okay. And I would think, I want to make sure
I love
understand
eggs
something.
myself. Huh?
Grilled versus fried. I'm going to assume based on our previous show and previous conversation that the meat is okay as long as it's grilled, it's not soaked in oil or flour, but grilled. Is that correct?
I think, yeah, well, there are two ways of looking at that. If you grill meat, then you have what we call glycation end products, and those contribute to cancer formation in cells. So when you get those grill marks on the meat, when the meat is darkened, those if you eat a lot of red meat particularly, then you're going to increase the likelihood of maybe colorectal cancer down the road. So it's not saying you can't eat meat, but you have to be um, conscious of how often you do this. So, um, especially fried food. Fried food, basically, the bottom line is there's a substance that occurs when you mix a protein and a carbohydrate together and you cook it. It creates a chemical called acrylamide. The acrylamide is a carcinogen. So anytime you fry anything that has a mixture of carbohydrate, so you're making pancakes, you're making acrylamide. You make French fries, you're making acrylamide. Anything that you fry that has that crust that forms. If you make bread, that brown crust it has what we call acrylamide in it. So,
Great. Well, thank you. Hey, look, that helps. I will grill, but not grill as often. And then more fish and more chicken, and as opposed to just my favorite food, which is steak. So I'll just have to eat it
and if
less
you eat the
often.
bread, just cut the crust off of it.
Cut the crust off. Okay.
Yeah, make it dainty.
All right. Got it.
Do you have any comment about there are two things in society that are pretty harmful drugs actually that are pretty prevalent that I think a lot of people consume and don't even think about the level that they consume them. That is alcohol and caffeine in America. What are the negative effects of specifically those two things that are so common in American life? Oh, there's a Starbucks on every corner. There, drinking is for every occasion. You're drinking for brunch. You're drinking when you get off work. You're drinking to celebrate. You're drinking, for all this. And a lot of people don't even think about that because of how intrinsic it is in American society.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're talking about two totally different substances. So coffee is natural. Uh, let's say this. Anytime you eat any food that has a dark, rich color, it has substances in it called polyphenols, chemicals that are phenols. And polyphenols are chemicals that are in the fruits. You got the purple fruits like the berries and whatnot, grapes and whatnot. You got the orange, cantaloupe. You have the red watermelon. You have the chocolate. You have the coffee. So these substances, these polyphenols, have the ability to enter the cells and they help they make the cells healthier. They help. So coffee in and of itself is not a problem. Caffeine in the coffee is going to limit most people from drinking too much of it in the first place because, if you drink up too much coffee, you're going to become agitated because of nervous stimulation. Unlike alcohol, on the other hand, you drink enough of that, you know what happens. Either you're going to pass or you're going to throw up. Something untoward's going to happen long before you get cirrhosis of the liver. You don't have a problem with coffee per se, but I have a big problem with alcohol. Because alcohol also contributes to diabetes, to hypertension, of course, alcohol too is made from carbohydrates. It's either made from, vegetables or it's made from fruit, but it's carbohydrate based. So eventually, alcohol is basically converted back to glucose. In fact, some people drink alcohol. The more alcohol they drink, the less they eat food. So.
Yeah, I think one of the issues with the coffee is not the coffee itself, but what's in most of these large coffee. Like you go to Starbucks, it's mostly sugar. There's
Yeah.
got all types of chemicals. They're huge, the venti size stuff. I think they have up to like 300 milligrams of caffeine in the large.
But that's not coffee. That's abuse. If you talk about the richness of coffee, you're talking about something that, people who are coffee connoisseurs, they savor it, just like they would do a fine wine or something like that. So coffee in and of itself, if you don't adulterate it, it's great for you. It's healthy for you, in fact. But once you add all that sugar and stuff, that's no longer coffee. That's you're drinking a little coffee with your sugar and all your little accoutrements.
Wow.
Yeah, that's not coffee at all. That's a dessert in a cup.
I
All
agree,
that
but I
coffee.
say it's referred to as coffee.
Exactly. Well, that's how they get you. You go to Starbucks. We a coffee cup. We sell coffee. But even if you look at it on the shelf, you got you got the cold brew coffees and all the stuff they have you can buy in the store. But mostly what you're doing is just drinking a lot of sugar. It's just a
Yeah.
liquid dessert. That's all it is.
That's my point. It's like it's a stealthy delivery method for people to have all this sugar added into their diet, and they're just thinking, oh, I'm just grabbing a coffee in the morning. I need my coffee, and they're not thinking about the
Right.
absurd amount of sugar that is in that
Exactly.
coffee.
But see, the whole bottom line is the way that this country is set up. I always have to go back to capitalism. You have to choose. You have the right to choose. You have a, quote unquote, free society. You have a right to decide what you're going to do to your body. Now, you understand that you're supposed to be the guardian of this body. It's supposed to be the body is your temple. And you understand how you're supposed to take care of it. See, the first problem is not knowing how you're supposed to take care of it. But once you know what you know better, when you know better, you do better. But that's the problem. Most of us don't know better because we're guided by our taste buds. It tastes good, so I'm eating it. And they know that. The food industry knows this. So they say, hey, we can make profits off the fact that we know good and well that the taste buds love sugar and salt. The two things they give you. They give you savory and they give you sweet. So if you want a snack, it's either going to be sweet or salty. You can buy all sweet. You can go to 7-Eleven and everything on the shelves practically is either sweet or salty.
It's true.
I was in the store today and I saw a coffee line. It was cold. I mean, I guess already prepackaged coffee. I guess they call it cold brew. Actually, I was in Sam's Club, so I was in there today. They had coffee that it was the same flavor as cereal. Sugar cereal
Loaded
coffee.
with sugar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Lucky Charms coffee or something.
Hey.
I mean, whatever the brand cereal was, it was coffee flavor.
That's capitalism at its best.
Wow.
That's capitalism at its best. Let's make the profit. We don't care the results of what it does to the people. Let's make the profits.
Yeah.
Well, what you're saying is very, very true. I can recall one time listening to LeBron James in an interview, and he talked about how he feels his body's a temple, and he doesn't put anything in his system that he does not know the nutritional value of it. I've heard the same thing once before with Tom Brady. And when you go back and you look at both of those athletes, you look at the longevity, because they are talking about now that LeBron James is playing better at 38 than he did when he was 21. And it's simply because I think of what they eat, and they know
Right.
what they eat, and they know whatever they eat, they know the nutritional value for them.
Right. Because see, the thing is that you, as you get older, particularly in professional sports, you are a very high priced commodity. So you have to make sure that in order for you to fill those seats and you to perform as you have been performing all this time, you have to understand muscle development. You have to understand how you make sure that the ligaments don't deteriorate. You have to understand the nutritional needs of the body, that you put them in every 24 hours. I said this before. Your body has nutritional needs that are supposed to be supplied every 24 hours. One of those nutrients, being absent, could contribute to your death. If your body needs zinc or copper and you're in deficiency, you could get up sick or dead. But we don't know this. But someone who's in their roles, they have their exercise physiologists and dietitians and nutritionists who are letting them know. These are the exact thing you need to eat so that your fast twitch muscle fibers are firing properly. So you're building up muscle tissue. So you're reducing the fat on the body. So you're getting the most bang for your buck. You're getting what they call body composition, such that your body fat is this low and your muscle is like this. So they know these things implicitly, scientifically, what to do for these athletes that they don't give to the lay public, because the lay public does not have the discipline most time to follow those guidelines.
Wow. All right, Dr. Clark, I know I slowed you up with the questions. I know you said you had a couple other things you wanted to drop on us. What else you got for us?
Okay, so I just wanted, and the reason I was bringing up all these things that seem so deep was that I can go back and say, okay, instead of saying coronary arteries, you can say heart attack. You know what that is, but it's caused by, you know, metabolic syndrome. You know what dialysis is, loss of kidney function. So the only thing I did was put the terminology there, that how the disease process comes about, but what the end point is. So if I say a person has an amputation of a leg, or a man became impotent or had erectile dysfunction, all these are because of poor blood flow, and the poor blood flow is coming about because of the destruction of the arteries by high blood sugar. So that was the whole genesis of trying to put this into a way of understanding of where do we go from the disease to these medical conditions. So what I was going to add, and this is going to be the tail end of everything here. So I discussed blindness, kidney failure, poor circulation, loss of limbs. Um, and since people see these things every day, I just felt it was necessary to bring them up. One thing I will say, and this is the last thing I'm going to say, a lot of people, as they get older, they tend to think that, okay, I'm getting older and my vision is getting poorer, and I have to start wearing glasses. And people are never told that if your triglyceride levels are elevated, if your fat levels are elevated, if you're obese, the fat in the bloodstream can get into the arteries to the eyes, and that's what causes you to get poorer vision. So as you start eating uh, fresh foods and whole foods and whatnot, your vision actually can improve because the fat levels go down, because the fats are primarily coming from either excess sugar or saturated fat from meats.
Boom. As I put my glasses on.
Yes, nobody really knows that vision problems are a lot of times directly related to diet. And this, you don't have to be a diabetic for this to happen, because, since we don't really frequently know our cholesterol levels, our triglyceride levels, I don't care what your weight is, what size you are, whether you have a disease or not. So a lot of times your vision problems are a direct result of that. The other thing I'm going to say is this. I said this before. Your doctor will say to you that you have high blood pressure, hypertension. Nobody ever says that hypertension is the first part of the metabolic syndrome. The first time that your metabolism starts to fail, most times is because of your diet. So you're on your way to a heart attack at 35. It may not occur till you're 60, but that's your first sign. That's the first, what they call, that's the first towel to fall.
Wow.
So when you say, oh, because we have a lot of people, doctor will say, and we just talk about black men really quickly while we're here, who don't want to go to the doctor, don't want to have a physical, just say, I feel fine. The doctor says on that first visit, that only visit they go to, oh, your blood pressure is elevated, he gives you a prescription. You go get the prescription. You go back to him a second time. He said, oh, your blood pressure is looking good because you've been taking medication. After a while, you stop taking the medication because you don't feel anything. Because I feel fine. So we have to dispel the myth that feeling fine means you're healthy. Feeling fine can kill you. So he
I
goes
think
back some years later, you look up all of a sudden, this same man was healthy and vital. Yesterday was lifting, 2x4s and sheetrock and everything. All of a sudden, he's in a wheelchair and had a stroke and has unilateral paralysis because he wouldn't just go to the doctor and did not know that his diet was contributing to disease and he couldn't even feel it. So they always talk about this thing about, this is a silent disease. This is a silent disease. This 94% of diseases are silent until they get to a point where it's dangerous.
Okay.
And that's what we have to
CJ,
get people. Yeah, go ahead.
CJ, you
no, I
want to
was
get in
just
there?
gonna say, at least for my generation, I think a lot of the resistance to go to the doctor, which is a real thing, has to do with the price of medical care in America and the fact that we don't have a healthcare system that won't leave you bankrupt if something is actually wrong with you. And depending on your income, I know a lot of people, especially in my age bracket, that have health concerns but will not go to the doctor because of the cost associated to it. So I think that is also a big barrier to a lot of people, at least in the United States. It's not quite an issue for everywhere else in the developed world where they have a healthcare system where they can not get medical bankruptcy. But in America, I think that is a huge problem on why people are so resistant. There are people who get hit by cars and refuse to get in the ambulance because of the ambulance costs. Like we're
Well,
in America, so there is going to be some resistance to people if they don't feel like they're going to immediately die. They're probably going to avoid the doctor for as long as possible.
okay, so here's the thing. What young people have to first know is health is wealth. So as much money as you think you want to make in your lifetime, the most money you can make is with your health. Because the longer that you stay healthy, and see, if our people knew that there is an equation about wealth, it says time plus money equals wealth. Which means if you start saving money when you're young, by the time you get old, you'll be okay, more than likely. But the other part is this. Let's talk about the insurance. Most young people do not know because the system doesn't educate you. One thing about the Affordable Care Act, and when Barack Obama was able to get that passed, was that a lot of young people who didn't have access to care can get medical care free under Medicaid if they qualify. Number one. Number two, a lot of young people are so intent on keeping every dime they get that their health it becomes a secondary thing when insurance may be available to them on their job, but they refuse to take it because I feel fine. So you have to be more, you know, you have to be more willing to accept the fact that, you know what? If I pay for anything, I should pay for my health. So if the insurance costs me $150 or $200 a month from my check, I should pay that because the best investment you can make in self.
The people that can afford to pay that, some people can't afford to take an extra $200 out of their
I'm
check.
not saying I'm not disputing what you're saying. I'm just saying that I've seen those who can, and also know that those who don't seek out to see whether or not there's something available. See, when Barack Obama made the Affordable Care Act, there are a lot of instances where healthcare costs can be brought way down for young people. That's why it was created. But since they don't call the check, they don't know. So maybe what they should be doing is say, okay, we have in the state of Maryland, the Maryland Health Exchange, Make a phone call. It doesn't hurt to make a phone call. You might find out that there was more available to you than you knew. And I'm saying this because I was involved in helping to create some of the healthcare. And that's why today, all children in the state of Maryland have access to dental care because I was involved in helping create the legislation. 2007, a young black child died because he couldn't get a tooth pulled. He had an abscess that went to his brain. That doesn't exist anymore because I decided, oh, you look, we have to help our people and create something here. And the same thing that Barack Obama was successful in doing, but we have to at least, if the resources are there, you gotta go look to see if they're there for you. If they're not there, I understand it, but if they are there, at least take the time to find out.
Wow. Dr. Fredrick Clark, I'd like for you to come back every maybe once a month or so, and we can just build on some of this or as needed, because this is a lot to digest and process. I will be pointing this show out to a couple of my friends who are big Dunkin' Donut fans. I've got one buddy who's just so enamored with Dunkin' Donuts, he straps the donuts in a safety belt just in case he has to hit the brakes. He doesn't want them to fly off. So
tell him it's okay to eat one donut a month.
Man,
I got a friend who's got a Dunkin' Donut rewards card.
I didn't even know they had a rewards card.
Oh yeah, they got a rewards card and they got an app. You can order on the app.
That's right. Everybody wants you to come back. Everybody has a rewards card now.
Oh man, the food deserts, a lot of things to process. Dr. Clark, thank you for coming on the show. And as always, we are the Thought Brothers. And until next time, we are out of here.
Right.
Take care,
Good night, everybody.